Welcome back to Pulso Demográfico, a program of UNFPA Mexico, in which we are debating some of the hottest topics around demographic change. And today we connect with Alida Vračić, a public policy expert, lawyer, and Europe Futures Fellow. She's co-founder and executive director of the think tank Populari, based in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Alida has done a lot of work on population change in Europe, and particularly on the issue of depopulation. So we really wanted to hear from you today, because across the globe, we see that these once vibrant rural communities are facing a silent crisis. Their populations are dwindling. Can you tell us some of the lessons learned from Europe's so-called ghost villages, as you call them?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Alanna. I think this is a wonderful idea to have talks related to these topics that are really important ones and relate to every single one of us. I think that the situation is truly urgent, if you will. What we're seeing is this deep imbalance between urban and between rural, and also opportunities and neglect. I read recently there was a research about the quantity of land that is being abandoned. So basically, estimates suggest there is around 400 million hectares of agricultural fertile land that is being completely abandoned since the 1950s. And if you actually put that into comparison in context of something, this is a size of the European Union, so 27 countries. This is also half of Australia. And it's a combination of factors. It's including rural depopulation, it's economic shifts, but it's also environmental degradation, because many of these places are really facing climate change. We're talking about crops failing, we're talking about rivers being dried, we're talking about storms that are coming more often, and they're coming also much harder. Air in many of the cities is polluted. So in that respect, rural areas really present an opportunity, if you will. So I also think that the rural areas are not just, accidentally left behind. I mean, there is also a purpose behind it, which is a progress. This is what we call progress, because many people flock to the cities because of the opportunities, because of the education. And many of these things can be indeed offered even in the rural areas. And then you have young people that delay or completely abandon the idea of becoming parents because they're not being offered or attracted to stay in these villages. And this is why these places are basically becoming ghost places. They face a risk of poverty, and they face also a risk of social exclusion. What we have seen, and I just want to touch briefly on that, what we have seen during COVID time is that every single one of these places can actually turn into something more amazing. We have seen thousands.
I wanted to ask you about that, Alida.
Sorry.
Thank you. No, thank you for moving into that, because I wanted to ask you about some of the efforts to revitalize these struggling rural areas. And now you're talking about some of the positive experiences that we saw during the COVID pandemic. So tell us more about that.
Absolutely. I mean, so what we have seen during COVID time, and we have done lots of research on that, is that people start appreciating once they're deprived of their freedom, they start appreciating their freedom. So we have seen in Southeast Europe and Central Asia, but really across the world, we have seen people coming back home, many of them into these rural areas, revitalizing them, building houses, restoring houses, and also opening their businesses, or actually transferring their businesses, because it proved to be true that many of these jobs that we have nowadays can be remote. They also decided to go to larger homes that they cannot afford no longer in the cities. Clean air, again, a region I come from, is really becoming heavily polluted, air polluted. So we start recognizing these things. Outdoor activities, this is one of the things that, it sells as an industry. It's a tourism, but also it can be a way of living. So these opportunities we have seen, it's a time-tested model, if you will, because we have seen it over the course of a couple of years, but now it needs to be upscaled, and we can talk about it if you want.
Right, because I wanted to ask you, do you think those efforts are sustainable? I mean, this clearly happened during a very specific context, the COVID pandemic. Do you think that this can be sustained? Do you know, what are the lessons learned and some of the strategies that countries, even countries like Mexico, because of course this program is really trying to take those lessons learned from other parts of the world and see how they can apply in a context such as Mexico, which itself has faced rural depopulation in many areas. So, you know, what are some of your recommendations or some of the lessons learned?
Well, I think like in many places, probably in Mexico, you know, the strength is in, I would say, you know, social fabric. What we have seen not working, the pitfalls. I mean, the pitfalls that we have seen in attempts to revitalize rural areas can be grouped in two different things. One is to try to implement urban sort of philosophy onto the rural areas, trying to import urban solutions without, you know, centering and placing local voices where they belong to. And infrastructure without people doesn't mean a thing. Funds, you know, without local input also don't mean a thing. We have seen really successful examples throughout, from Ireland to Spain and then in Italy, where you have grants for different businesses, but these businesses are also you know, leaned onto the actual demands of the local people and not just invented for the purposes of something that could work in the cities. Also, we have seen access to housing that is being done in Spain, but this housing is not just, you know, I'll give you the house and you live there, but also including these people into local decision making. So these kind of things could be, I think, a really an important factor in upscaling some of the initiatives. As for Mexico and other areas, I think social sort of fabric and this translocal connections really matter. We're talking here about migration. We're talking about return migration. We're talking about diaspora bonds that have been attempted and they work because some of this knowledge and skills and you know, everything that sort of embodies relations when it comes to diaspora is being transferred in a proper way. So some of the lessons is that we need to, you know, not to attempt to sort of trying to import urban solutions, also not to try to ignore demographic realities of these places, because these places are truly depopulated often. There's also a burden of care for elderly that falls onto women in many of these places. Very little is being provided for children. I mean, there are no schools and there are no sort of creative components that could attract people to have kids or bring them to these places. And I don't see any reasons why, you know, we can't upscale some of the existing initiatives. I mean, one that we have talked about in Serbia quite a bit is this scholarships or residences for artists, for digital nomads. There is no reason why that cannot be offered to young families, you know, to spend there a year or two or even a longer period of time. Also, higher education is really interesting, I think, because it is one thing that can exist in rural areas. You can have campuses, you can have a mix of things where you put different generations together. You have elderly that are already in these places, but then you also have young people and maybe some combination of living that we have seen in Scandinavia. We know that this sort of microsystem can work because we have seen it working. So many of these initiatives are already working, but not on a scale that can show us actually a real change.
I think it's really interesting, Alida, and you're giving us a number of different recommendations in a way. Can you tell me, one, had you written this down somewhere in terms of sort of policy recommendations and the different policy options for facing rural depopulation? And two, if you can think of one or two places in the world where you've seen actually this revitalization taking place. You know, a couple of examples that one could actually look at to see what they did that might be might give us lessons learned for other experiences in different parts of the world.
Absolutely. So yes, this has been written not only by me, but also other colleagues, and there's scholars writing heavily on this topic. And I think what really is important is to sort of cluster it into 2 or 3 or 4 different set of recommendations, because one is for the individuals. This second one is, something that we call a global effort. But what really matters, I think, is this sort of a more central, sort of a national, but also, local initiative that comes directly from these rural areas. And this is what we have seen in Bulgaria. This is what we have seen in Serbia. When you have a small town mayors or village municipal leaders actually really deciding to take an action. And they understand that they no longer can rely on the national level because they're overburdened with all sorts of other things. They cannot also rely necessarily on the EU for that matter, and many of them are not members of the EU. So they really take an action in attracting people, but also offering different incentives, be it small funds, be it small scholarships. It's often for the students, but it's also for the digital nomads. Many countries have attempted also to give visas and really sort of easy to get work permits that can now be actually, that they can be managed online, because there are many services that came out of COVID-19 technologically. So you can obtain your work visa online. So there are these things, and they have been written down. It's a matter of implementation and understanding it also in a somewhat, I would say, greater context, because rural revitalization is never about rural revitalization only. It's also about climate change. It's also about demography. You have to put all these things together to understand a little bit better, to center it around that local community and to see what can be done. I mean, there are many universities that are willing to sort of, outsource a little bit towards areas that are more affordable. There are areas that can offer also students outdoor activities. This is something that needs to be replicated and on a much greater scale. And one other thing that I wanted to mention, when we talk about rural areas, I always feel attending different conferences and being in different circles, I really feel that often when we talk about it, we talk about rural areas, like we're trying to save them, like in a way that they're inferior. But they're really not. Actually, this is where we all come from, right? So they're full of life and they're full of resilience, resistance, and memory, if you will. So just imagine the number that I put in at the beginning of this talk: 400 million, even more. The estimates go to 420 million hectares that is being abandoned, while half of the planet is struggling to find any food, let alone quality food. So I think there's a great potential if you want to see it. There's also a work ahead of us, working with local leaders, because they are the most important ones, and they are also the ones that can attract different funds from elsewhere. I mean, there are places in Croatia that I know of, like a little islands, and some of them have, like 7,000 people living constantly on these islands. They're able to attract millions and millions of viewers for different projects because they're very vibrant and very active. So sometimes it takes, few people that are interested, and another few people that are able to do it, and then we can upscale some of these ideas. And there are many more ideas that I haven't mentioned that are out there already.
Well, thank you, Alida. And the downfall with this program is it's very short, so we don't have time to go into all of the different recommendations that you've made, but it's really interesting to hear your perspective. I think the idea of the local leadership and how important that is something that we take away as well, and that we need to support that local leadership in terms of, allowing the local leaders, mayors to build these thriving, inclusive communities. So thank you so much, Alida. It's really always a pleasure. We will be coming back to you to delve even more into these issues and see how we can bridge some of these experiences between Mexico and some of the countries that you have been talking to us about. But
Wonderful.
we really appreciate your perspectives, and thank you very much for being on Pulso Demográfico.
Thank you so much, Alanna. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.